Today, I'm going to be talking about the hidden signs of trauma or unresolved trauma that potentially could show up in your everyday lives. Some of these you may relate to, some of them no, some of them you may have and you're just not mindful or conscious of them. So this is just some ways where trauma can show up. And at the end of the class, I'm going to give you a personal example myself. So trauma is often discussed in terms of the visible effects, of that could be hypervigilance, whatever, visual effects. It could be flashbacks, panic attacks, or avoidant behaviors. However, research in psychology and neuroscience suggests that unresolved trauma can shape daily life in less than apparent ways. So many individuals who have experienced trauma may not recognize its influence, particularly when symptoms manifest as common personality traits or what we believe are personality traits, maybe even habits. They also affect some of our decision-making patterns. Understanding these hidden signs can provide insight. And I always say, the more you know, the more you grow, and you cannot heal what you don't acknowledge. So if nothing else, this will give you some insight into how trauma subtly influences daily interactions. Could also influence our physical health and our long-term patterns. So studies indicate that unresolved trauma can alter a person's behavioral responses without them even being consciously aware. Several common habits, in some cases, again, could be linked to past experiences, such as do you have a tendency to over-explain or over-apologize? Research suggests that individuals who grew up in environments where mistakes led to punishment or emotional withdrawal may develop a heightened sense of needing to justify their actions or preemptively apologize. This can be an adaptive response rooted in early life experiences rather than, just a personality quirk. Keeping in mind, trauma, if you over apologize that or over explain, doesn't mean that you've had this big, huge trauma in your childhood. A lot of times, trauma is not necessarily what we got, but actually what we didn't get. So, it also shows up in ways of perfectionism and maybe hyperproductivity. Heightened perfectionism is a trait that studies have associated with childhood developments where self-worth was linked to the achievement or performance. The brain may interpret errors as potential threats, reinforcing a need for control over outcomes. Could also show up in chronic procrastination and difficulty making decisions. Absolutely a trauma response. Trauma can interfere with executive functioning, leading to avoidant behaviors that are sometimes misinterpreted as laziness or lack of motivation. Some individuals experience decision paralysis, fearing that making the wrong choice could lead to negative consequences, similar to past experiences. A lot of, I don't want to derail too much, but oftentimes when you're working with somebody, let's just say that has ADHD. Now, ADHD is a form of anxiety or it presents itself, from anxiety. And that anxiety could be rooted from some type of trauma. And I'm not going to sit here and say in this class, every time we take a breath, it's because we're traumatized. I'm just saying these are just things to be mindful of. And what happens sometimes with people with ADHD is they get so overwhelmed with the 400 televisions that are on in their head, all with the volume up high, they just get so overwhelmed. They just want to lie down in bed because your body just doesn't, your body and brain and soul does never get a break. So that could be perceived as laziness. Also, a hyper awareness of others' moods, heightened sensitivity to tone, body language, nonverbal cues, such as certain scents and sounds that could be that could be an adaptive trait developed in unpredictable or emotionally volatile environments. A lot of people are empathetic, or what do you call that? HSPs, highly sensitive people. That very well could be a trauma response. Absolutely. This heightened vigilance may persist even in safe relationships. And of course, listen, um, uh, once you're traumatized, your brain kind of changes. Now it is malleable, you can manage it, all this other stuff. But even if you're in safe environments, a lot of these default coping mechanisms or trauma responses still present themselves. All right, trauma can show up in physical health as well. Now, we all know that there's all kinds of different physical manifestations, including um, just being completely fatigued and tired. I mean, if I'm working with somebody in the first acute stages of, like, say, disclosure or D-Day, oftentimes they're sleeping 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day just to get up, go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, and they're ready for a nap. And one of the reasons is because your mind, body, and soul, every cell in your body is working overtime to go back to this, homeostasis or this parasympathetic state. So you just don't get a proper rest, even if you're sleeping. Your body can't get a proper rest. It comes in the form of chronic pain, maybe autoimmune disorders. Some research suggests that trauma-related stress can contribute to inflammation and dysregulation of the immune system, leading to persistent physical symptoms. There's a lot of times people out of trauma, and I'm talking 10, 15, 20, 30, 45 years later, they're getting manifestations of things. Now, certainly you can say, well, Mr. J, that could be old age as well. Well, certainly, but at the same token, there's stress, there's trauma-induced physical manifestations that, again, just to be mindful. Tension-related headaches and muscle pain. A study in neurobiology highlights that prolonged stress and responses can lead to uh, hyperactivation to the nervous system, contributing to chronic tension. And if anybody knows that has chronic tension in your body, that can just cause havoc on your body, period. There's digestive issues. I mean, this is well documented. The gut-brain axis is well-studied area in medical science, and findings suggest that trauma can impact gut health, leading to IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and other digestive disturbances. Trauma can affect relationship and life choices. A lot of times we are attracted to familiar patterns. Um, Studies on attachment trauma suggest that individuals may unconsciously seek relationships that mimic past dynamics. However, that doesn't necessarily mean those dynamics are healthy. A lot of times when I'm even like coaching somebody, premarital coaching, a lot of times I'll hear, oh, I feel like we've known each other forever. We've only known each other for 6 weeks and whatever. That could be a fantastic thing. It really can be. It also could be because if you come from a traumatic, abusive childhood and this person feels familiar, you might want to, wait a little while before you get married, do a little bit more research on this person, or just kind of, date for a while. So again, attraction and familiar patterns could be a trauma response. Fear of abandonment versus hyper independence. That could be a trauma response. Research indicates that trauma survivors may react to relational stress in different ways. Some become overly dependent on others for validation, and then just the opposite. Others may push people away to maintain control over their emotional safety. So any of the extremes could be a trauma response. Difficulty setting boundaries. A psychological study that highlighted that individuals with unresolved trauma may struggle to enforce boundaries, often prioritizing others' needs over their own due to past conditioning. So I'm not going to get into this. I've had other classes on what are boundaries, how do you set them, how do you reinforce them, yada yada. But just in general, boundaries are a very difficult task to take on with a lot of people that have had trauma. Trauma often shows up in professional and social environments. You could either be, it could show up in workaholism, maybe even that can lead to burnout. Some trauma survivors develop a strong identity tied to a professional success as a means to maintain stability and self-worth. So again, they're looking for that external validation via becoming, which is why a lot of times if I'm working with, let's just say, a couple, and they're working to rebuild and repair after broken trust, a lot of times one or both parties will work a lot of hours, put in a lot of hours. Now they could make it think like, well, I'm doing this so I can take her on vacation, or I'm doing this so I can relieve, you know, buy him a new wedding ring or whatever. And maybe that's the truth, you know, but is that the iceberg that we see, or is that the iceberg under the water that we don't see? What is the real reason you're working overtime? Is it because that's also a way to numb, distract, and avoid? Avoidance of conflict. Psychological literature has examined how past trauma can lead to discomfort with confrontation, causing individuals to avoid advocating for themselves. I talk with so many people every day that do not like conflict. They are conflict avoidant, and a lot of this is absolutely from previous trauma. Overcommitting or people pleasing. Some trauma survivors exhibit an ingrained pattern of overextending themselves to gain approval and avoid rejection. A lot of people that have a trauma past do not like rejection. The reason people have trauma sometimes is because of continuous long-term patterns of rejection. The last thing you want to do is feel rejection. So somebody says, "Hey, can you give me a ride here?" Absolutely. Then you look at your schedule and you're like, "Crap, there's no way I can give them a ride here, but there's no way I'm going to call them and tell them I can't." You know whatever. So just keep in mind, I've said this 1,000 times, and everybody watching this knows this. No is a complete sentence, and no is actually self-care. Unresolved trauma can manifest in many ways and often misinterpreted as simple personality traits or lifestyle choices. You know, I say all the time when we're younger, a lot of times we take on these coping mechanisms that were results from trauma. And then as we get older, if we don't work on them, they present as personality traits, but actually what they are trauma costumes that we put on that we never work to take off. So it's not who we are, it's who we've become based on our childhood trauma. While not all individuals will exhibit these behaviors, I've said this at the beginning of the class, research does continue to explore the subtle ways in which trauma does shape our daily life, physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, spiritually, psychologically, you name it. So by recognizing these signs, individuals may gain a better understanding of their behavior patterns and seek appropriate support. The next time you find yourself with a little extra time on your hands, see if any of these responses that I mentioned in this class are exhibited by you. And if yes, ask yourself, are these something that, you know, I want to work on, I should work on, or I need to work on? And I told you at the beginning of the class, I'm going to give you a little personal example. Ever since I was a late teen, well, mid to late teens, when I say chocoholic, I mean chocoholic. I would walk into the store and buy 3 king-size candy bars and eat them while I was shopping. And then as I was leaving the store, buy another 3 king-size candy bars. I have done this, my Lord, probably, I can't tell you how many decades. I was a chocoholic. And I went to see dietitians, nutritionists, talked to my own MD, family doctor, coaches, holistic practitioners who would all give me wonderful input. Try Carob, try drinking some chocolate milk with skim milk because it's low fat, but it gives you that chocolate. It wasn't until I started working on my trauma that I discovered, my Lord, every time I had a trauma feeling, trauma response, trauma trigger, I ran to chocolate. That was my go to. Now, I'm not saying my chocolate addiction, I shouldn't even say addiction, but because that's putting it out there in the ethers and all that stuff. I'm not saying it's completely gone because it's not. I know to this day, if I feel some stress or anxiety or what, I mean, you know, an addiction is an addiction. And I was a chocoholic for many, many years. So there's, you know, psychological components to the addiction, there's physical components to the addiction. The minute I feel any type of stress, overwhelm, anxiety, you name it, my default is to run to chocolate. The difference now is I don't run to carob. I don't run to chocolate milk. I don't run to this. I use my tools to handle the triggers of my trauma. And I now, does that mean that I still don't get temptations and I still eat chocolate? Absolutely, I do. But I'm mindful and I'm conscious of where it came from, rather than, oh my God, I'm just a chocoholic. What do I do? Let me run to a nutritionist or a dietitian or try to go get some diet pills because I was pretty overweight from eating a lot of chocolate in my life. This is what I mean by trauma responses and how they show up. And it wasn't until I was probably in my 30s, almost 40s, before I really did a lot of deep dive shadow work, trauma work. Oh my Lord. It's like oh my, that's where my that's where my that chocolate fix that releases all those feel good and love chemical. That's what I needed when I felt down. So, like I always say, the more you know, the more you grow.